Unlike the majority of organisms that exist within the galaxy, the Tyranids are a species that is the seeming antithesis of individuality. The entire species is linked to a gestalt web of consciousness that is known simply as the hive mind. To oversimplify, this hive mind is an amalgamation of the billions upon billions of individual Tyranid organisms that all seek to fulfill a singular objective: to consume and evolve. In essence, the hive mind itself functions as the consciousness of a galactic superpredator, commanding individual organisms in a way evocative to how a brain, consciously or otherwise, might command the various components, cells, and organs of a living body. The dominating force of the hive mind is emanated through specialist organisms known as synapse creatures. These synapse creatures, which include bioforms such as hive tyrants, Tyranid primes, and Tyranid warriors, act as living psychic conduits of the hive mind's influence, allowing them to impose the will of the hive mind onto lesser organisms, in a manner evocative of a general relaying commands to soldiers upon the field of battle. Without the presence of the hive mind to assume direct control over their actions, the behavior of lesser organisms, such as gaunts or biovores, will revert to a more feral, instinctive state. The very concept of the hive mind is also regularly displayed by the semi-autonomous Tyranid organisms known as gene stealers, albeit on a far smaller scale. Gene stealers, pure strains and hybrids alike, are known to display a collective behavior similar to that of the hive mind, known as the brood mind. This brood mind allows a brood or cult's alpha organism, such as a brood lord or patriarch, to influence and manipulate the very actions of those under its psychic thrall. However, this particular collective consciousness will typically be completely overridden by the domineering force of the hive mind whenever a Tyranid hive fleet enters a system that has been subjected to gene stealer infestation. While attempts have been made for psykers to make contact with the hive mind in order to study it or determine its origins, these have almost universally met with failure. The sheer scope and overwhelming psychic presence of the hive mind is quite simply beyond the comprehension of most mortals, though a small number of individuals, such as Pharaoh Tigerius, the chief librarian of the Ultramarines chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, have managed to succeed in making contact with the hive mind without losing their sanity in the process. But even then, such individuals have only been able to determine an approximate location as to where the Tyranids may strike next. There have been many theories and hypotheses regarding the hive mind, and in particular its origin. But which of these speculations would appear to be the most feasible? One possibility is that the hive mind itself is merely nothing more than a psychic network that allows the Norn queens of the various hive fleets to remain in contact with one another. This would allow the various queens of each fleet to share knowledge in regards to the location of the richest feeding grounds, as well as information regarding potential threats to the hive and how best to counteract them. This certainly seems to be the most likely possibility, especially when given the fact that each hive fleet bears a unique set of markings and coloration to their flesh and chitin to differentiate them from one another. The Norn queens themselves, the apparent dominant organism within each respective hive fleet, would from an initial glance appear to be using their incredible psychic potency in order to enforce their will over their respective hive fleet tendril, in a manner similar to how a queen bee makes use of pheromones in order to control and direct the various workers and drones within its hive. But some have speculated that, despite the influence that the Norn queens themselves exude onto the other, lesser organisms of the hive fleets, there could in fact be another organism in the Tyranid hierarchy that outranks the Norn queens, and in turn guides them in a manner similar to how the queens guide their own respective tendrils. Since the 8th edition Tyranid Codex does indeed confirm that the actions of every hive fleet tendril is said to be influenced by the actions of a singular hive mind, then what sort of being could be powerful enough to assert its dominance over the entirety of the Tyranid species? One possibility is that the hive mind is simply the will of an even more highly evolved Tyranid organism that has yet to be documented by any of the sentient races that exist within the galaxy, such as a theoretical Norn Empress. Others have speculated that the Tyranids were in actuality creations of the ancient race known as the Old Ones. The Old Ones, commonly cited to be the first sentient race to appear within the galaxy, created or otherwise nurtured a number of species, including those of the Eldari, Slan, Crud, and the Krork. Some of these races, the Eldari and Krork in particular, were developed by the Old Ones in order to act as soldiers during the event known as the War in Heaven, where the Old Ones battled against another ancient Xenos race, the Necrontyr, and their masters, the Catan. As such, seeing as they have created and nurtured many notable species within the galaxy, then it would be reasonable to assume that the Old Ones could potentially have created, in essence, a race of protonids. Thanks to the engineering of the Old Ones, a potential protonid species could easily have flourished and multiplied before they were, for whatever reason, driven from the galaxy, and eventually evolved into the modern-day Tyranid strain, similar to how the Krork would over time become the race known as Orcs. The possibility of the Tyranids being the creations of the Old Ones is also loosely supported within the book Xenology, due to the existence of an ancient stone tablet that was recovered from Eldari Exodites. This tablet shows a brief history of the galaxy, with the lower portions of the tablet showing stylized representations of the Old Ones, creating many of the numerous races that exist within the galaxy. Some of the races depicted upon this tablet can easily be identified, such as the Eldari and Hrud. But one creature in particular would at first glance sport an appearance similar to one of many Tyranid organisms, such as that of a Gaunt, the Tyranid substrain that includes termagants, hormagaunts, and gargoyles. This is due to the creature's superficially reptilian appearance, featuring both a long tail and spine-like ridges upon its back, which in itself could be a stylistic interpretation of an armored carapace. Despite the apparent similarities, this particular creature depicted upon the tablet has only 4 limbs, while most Tyranid organisms are known to have 6. As such, there is always the chance that this creature depicted could instead represent another race of reptiloids, such as the Tyrellians or even the Loxatl. But if the Old Ones did create the Hive fleets, then for what purpose would they have done so? The Old Ones' mission was to seemingly produce and nurture new forms of life, as opposed to extermination, though the Old Ones themselves were indeed capable of great acts of destruction upon their foes. Perhaps in this regard, the Hive fleets would have been created to act as some form of contingency plan, should the seed races cultivated by the Old Ones ever turned against them, or they had somehow become contaminated. This would then allow the Old Ones to, in effect, wipe the galactic slate clean in order to start their experiments again from scratch. It would also be reasonable to assume that the Old Ones had access to some kind of terraforming technology that would allow them to restore the worlds that were left as little more than lifeless husks in the wake of a Tyranid cleansing, allowing them to one day support fully intact biospheres once more. This wouldn't be entirely unprecedented, as the Eldari, who themselves are creations of the Old Ones, also have access to this type of technology, and have been known to utilize it in order to create paradise worlds that would be known to the Eldari as the Maiden Worlds. However, there is always the likelihood that if the hive mind is truly the will of a singular entity, one that is neither one of the Old Ones or even a highly evolved Tyranid organism, then could the source of the hive mind instead be the entity called Saranoga, or as it is more commonly known, the Outsider. The Outsider is one of the mysterious godlike beings known as the Catan, and is considered to be one of the most powerful and infamous of their number, alongside the Nightbringer, Deceiver, and Void Dragon. despite the Outsider's legendary status, precious little is known about this particular Catan, for unlike the Deceiver or Nightbringer, little if any records exist of the Outsider aside from those of its involvement during the War in Heaven. What makes the Outsider a potential candidate for being the very source of the Tyranid Hive mind is the fact that the Outsider was said to have been tricked into devouring many of the other lesser Catan, and was indeed described as possessing a voracious and insatiable hunger, much like the Hive Fleets themselves. There is also an ancient Eldari prophecy which details the return of the four most powerful Catan, as detailed within the 3rd edition Necron Codex.
The Banshee's call shall wake the dead, when dark portents wax nigh. Heed them as the counsel of a seer or a father. The Ingir, who have slept since the birth of chaos, shall crawl once more from their tombs, thirsting for warmth. The war in heaven shall be as nothing to their vengeance, for the sons of Assyrian, few in number, cannot stand against them. And the eye of Isha shall dim, closing for eternity. Such a gentle goddess cannot witness such atrocities as they shall wreak. The soulless ones shall be the harbingers of the dark fate. Then shall come the living dead, the progeny, then the thirsting ones, the forever damned. And the galaxy shall run red as the blood of Eldanesh. The Vol moon shall bring forth the dragon. The master of death will drink deep from Isha's eye. That which lies outside will be drawn to the harvest, and the jackal god shall turn brother against brother. The four shall take their place amongst the stars, their legions ascendant, unstoppable as the night. A deadly shroud shall fall across the spirit, and the galaxy shall mourn.
The Outsider, here referenced as that which lies outside, is said to one day return to the galaxy in order to harvest, an act that can be interpreted a number of ways. It seems to strongly invoke that the Outsider is, or at least was, outside the boundaries of the galaxy, and is being drawn to it in order to harvest all life. The Tyranids, in an unnervingly similar manner, are also an extragalactic threat being drawn to fresh feeding grounds, thanks to the events that unfolded during the Battle of Sotha, which took place during the course of the Horus Heresy. This would also appear to be supported within the 3rd edition Necron Codex, where the last page details the locations of each of the 4 major Catan. Mars, which is said to have the Void Dragon imprisoned beneath its surface. Neogeddon, which saw the first documented sighting of the Deceiver. And Pavonis, where the Nightbringer was entombed. And yet, just outside the galaxy, it also details an unknown object that would appear at first glance to be at the head of Hive Fleet Leviathan. It is strongly implied that this object is in fact either the physical form or the prison of the Outsider, leading the Hive Fleets into the galaxy to devour all in their path, very much like the Outsider itself. Though given how the behaviour of Hive Fleet Leviathan is described as being anomalous, it is certainly possible that this object was simply in the path of Leviathan, which as a result is simply altering their course in order to avoid this mysterious object. While the Outsider hypothesis does indeed seem plausible, there are a few potential problems with this possibility. The first and most obvious of which is that the history of the Necron race, Catan, and that of the War in Heaven underwent drastic changes with the release of the 5th edition Necron Codex, which resulted in much of the information from the 3rd edition Codex becoming null and void. The story of the Deceiver convincing the Outsider to consume the power of the other Catan, for example, was altered so that the first Catan to consume another was instead the Nightbringer. Another major change is that each of the Catan had their physical forms shattered into a number of shards, with each shard, while still incredibly powerful, being nothing compared to the godlike power that the C'tan used to wield when their physical forms were intact. Though admittedly, given how little information actually exists about the Outsider, then if it did truly exile itself from the galaxy following the war in Heaven, there is still a chance, albeit an incredibly slim one, that the Outsider is still fully intact. But perhaps the most terrifying thing about the hive mind is not what it is, but rather what it is becoming. Given that the hive mind is a vast psychic communication shared between billions upon billions of organisms, then there is in fact a distinctive possibility that this hive mind would begin to generate its own echo within the warp. Within the novel Devastation of Baal, the chief librarian of the Flesh Eaters chapter, Scaraban, puts forth the notion that the hive mind is in fact slowly becoming a new godlike entity.
I am sure its origins are in this realm of being. We are not alone in holding this opinion of its nature. The reports of Inquisitor Cryptman, others in the Inquisition, and the Magos Biologus suggest so, at least those that support this interpretation. Perhaps what we are seeing is a creature partway to spiritual transcendence, a gestalt made of the minds of billions of brute animals trapped half in and half out of the warp by unending hunger.
This hypothesis would even be supported by the Blood Angels' chief librarian, Mephiston, who would go on to state that what better word would there be to describe the hive mind than a god? Should the hive mind evolve into a state of godhood to become a hypothetical god of hunger, then not only would all life within the material realm remain at risk from the Great Devourer, but perhaps those that inhabit the Sea of Souls known as the Warp would also become prey for this new deity. The Tyranids themselves have indeed begun to evolve countermeasures to combat against the powers of chaos, as demonstrated with the bioforms of Hive Fleet Kronos. Perhaps the hive mind is slowly transcending the boundaries of reality to encompass the warp. In addition to the material realm, is also part of the hive mind's agenda to consume all in its path, not just biological matter, but spiritual as well. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.